As Russia's attacks on Ukraine continue, the US joins its global allies in figuring out how to best respond. What is the US willing and not willing to do to help Ukraine? And what is the best way to impose punitive sanctions on Russia without provoking a larger conflict? To help us understand how the US is navigating this crisis, I spoke to the PBS NewsHour's Foreign Affairs and Defense correspondent, Nick Schifrin.
The main U.S. goal when it comes to the war in Ukraine is to make sure that Russia loses strategically. That means militarily. The U.S. and its allies have been flooding Ukraine with weapons with which Ukrainian forces have been able to generally keep Russian troops on the back foot.
But the US levied some of the most punishing sanctions against Russia ever seen. For that, I turned to NewsHour congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins.
All of the sanctions that the U.S. has placed on Russia since it invaded Ukraine came from executive power, from the president himself, and from a little-known law to most people that was passed in the 1970s. It's called IEEPA, which is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Congress has power over a few very big decisions, like the power to declare war and the power to set the overall funding level, how much we're funding the military. But essentially, the president decides everything else.
And the president's sanctions are meant to isolate and punish Russia.
The Russian economy is relatively small, but they are integrated, most notably through their Russian oil and gas exports. And so the U.S. took a step to ban any of those imports from Russia. The Europeans have not taken those steps yet, but clearly the U.S. is trying to rally the West to try and not buy any Russian exports, most notably oil and gas.
Beyond oil and gas, these sanctions have also been aimed at hurting Russia's military capacity.
So Russia relies on Western technology. Frankly, much of its military relies on that technology. And so the U.S. has cut off not only American chips, but American design chips and any chips or any technology that actually has any American IP. And that means that long term, Russia will have a very difficult time trying to supply its own technological aspirations, but also, frankly, trying to resupply its own military.
So the US wants to isolate the Russian economy and degrade Russia's military capabilities, while simultaneously providing military support for the Ukrainians.
The US and the Europeans have really mobilized one of the largest arms support to any non-NATO country that we've ever seen in NATO's history.
The US and its allies have sent everything from body armor to anti-tank Javelin missiles.
Also anti-air missiles. So these are missiles called Stingers that can target Russian helicopters and low-flying jets.
The US has also found ways to help the Ukrainians in more familiar weapon systems too, sending Soviet-era SA-8 surface-to-air missile systems and S-300 air defense systems acquired at the end of the Soviet Union to Ukraine. But there are a few high-profile maneuvers that the US has stopped short of promising. For example, blocking the transfer of fighter jets to instead send drones.
So the Americans have tried to draw a line between defensive and offensive weapons, and the American administration defines an offensive weapon essentially as a weapon that can cross borders, that has a range that's long enough to be more than just a weapon to defend territory.
In early March, the United States blocked a transfer of Polish MiG-29 fighter jets, which Ukrainian soldiers are trained on and more familiar with because Americans were worried about further provoking Russia. The United States has also blocked a no-fly zone over Ukraine for that same concern.
At the end of the day, the US and Europe have provided Ukraine a lot of the air defense systems that Washington and Brussels and London say are a de facto no-fly zone. The Ukrainians would say they need even more.
While the end goal may be clear, this tension between how strongly we back Ukraine and punish Russia has fueled some debate back home.
Members of Congress have wanted more action more quickly than the White House has throughout this conflict, especially at the beginning. Members of Congress from both parties, in public and behind the scenes, were pushing the president to issue tougher sanctions and to do it more quickly.
But so far, there has been unity in the objective of our approach.
There are still some divides over things like how we could have helped Poland, for example, send some Soviet-era planes, MiGs, to Ukraine. But there's no difference in whether to support the military and whether to support Ukraine. So this is an area where members of Congress generally see eye to eye with each other.
Yet, this approach could change as the war rages on. Since Russia invaded more than a month ago, Ukrainians have provided strong resistance. And on Friday, April 1st, Ukraine allegedly attacked an oil depot in Russia.
The Biden administration has been very concerned about Russia and Vladimir Putin, as his back is up against the wall, as President Biden put it recently, resorting to non-conventional weapons. So most obviously that would be chemical. The reason that chemical is on the top of the list is because the Russians have used it in the past. As for the nuclear fears, intelligence officials say it's not based on any particular intelligence that they've picked up, but still the Russian doctrine calls for the possible use of nuclear weapons. And again, Russia's conventional weapons have really failed them in terms of their effort to overthrow Kyiv. And so that's why U.S. is so concerned about their resorting to non-conventional weapons.
And as the U.S. and its allies continue to navigate this, the human toll is mounting. The United Nations estimates there have been more than 1,300 civilian casualties, but state the actual number is likely much higher. It has also caused a refugee crisis, as over 4 million Ukrainians have left their country in search of safety. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Tim McPhillips.